So hi everyone, and welcome back to the AmBIssadors. You're joined by me, Vaneet. My pronouns are he, him, and Lo.
I'm Lo, I'm they, she.
And we are joined by our lovely guest today. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Gabriel Alexa. My pronouns are she, her.
Tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
I don't even know how to describe it real quick. So I'm a writer. I am soon to be an author as well. I am just really bi on the internet. I feel like it's a really succinct way of saying what I do.
You're just a bicon. You're a well-known bicon.
Somewhat well-known bicon, right?
I think you should get that as like a card that you can give out, business card.
Right. Well, it's the people not on the internet would have no idea what that is. I go to my family's Thanksgiving dinner and they're like, literally, we have no idea what your job is. And I keep saying I'm online, I'm on the internet. They just don't get it.
I feel like a lot of people don't get the whole we're very online. That's our life. They just don't understand that.
That's it.
So
I'm even getting the book and stuff. That was just from being very online. And then someone was like, hey, since you're online, you want to write about it?
I think that's kind of how that's how I got my book deal. That's how you got yours, Lo.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of, yeah. I was I pitched them a different book and then they were like, hey, no to this one, but we saw that you're a very online bisexual. You reckon you could write about that? And I was like, oh, okay, yeah, sure.
That's the topic that I would love to write about, at least in the context of immigration in the United States. But I feel like it's so hard because there's been so much of an influx of bi material that now book publishers seem to think that that singular understanding of bisexuality is it. They're like, we already got it. We got this one person and that's enough. So now let's focus on all the other topics, even though there are so many different ways that you could tackle exploring bisexuality.
See, we're good because our publisher is the same one, and it's they're publishing other bi books, and they're literally just let's publish 10 million bi books. Let's do it. Let's
I'm
right.
Publisher after I'm done. What amazing.
And that kind of what you were just saying links to what we were going to talk about today, right? So we were going to talk a little bit about being bisexual and how that intersects with our other identities and our other experiences of moving through this capitalist, patriarchal, white supremacist world that we found ourselves in.
Mm-hmm.
Let's start with what your identity means to you, because you're obviously bisexual, you're Black, you're a woman, and obviously having all of those three things together plays off each other and can end up being quite damaging, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, I've been exploring this a lot in terms of the hypersexualization of Black bodies, particularly in the United States, as a result of, those colonial narratives around Blackness and being savage and hypersexual and sexually indiscriminate. That was a huge stereotype that that eventually became the Jezebel stereotype and the Black buck stereotype, which is another huge reason why I hate when people keep trying to use those very animalistic terms to refer to bi people, when they're like, oh my God, don't use butch and femme, use doe and stag. I'm stag literally was used to describe hypersexual Black men. So why would a bisexual masculine of center person want to use that term? It's just so frustrating. That was a side note, but because of the hypersexualization of bisexual people, being Black and bisexual means you have that additional layer. And then right now we're talking a lot about police relations in the United States, and it's a huge issue. We've been talking a lot about police brutality through the lens of when you call the police and they show up, they shoot people. But another huge aspect of police brutality is sexual violence and the re-traumatization of victims of sexual violence. And it's less likely for them to believe people who come forward when they're bisexual. It's less likely for them to believe Black people. It's less likely, and it's even more likely for them to re-traumatize and even be the original traumatizer when it comes to sexual violence, because they're more likely to go after bi people and Black people. So when all of those things combine, it just feels like I might as well be a sexual person. And sometimes I wonder if my particular like lens of sexuality is because of the hypersexuality from other people, or if it's just like me being me.
Yeah, for sure. Maybe like kind of a reclamation type thing.
Well, I do think there's a lot of reclamation, yeah, but I wonder if the initial desire to like reclaim at all is because of it being like I wonder if it is a genuine character trait, I guess, or if it's just a response.
Yeah, for sure. What you said about like the police re-traumatizing is super interesting, because that's definitely the case here in the UK as well. And like, obviously I run the Bi Survivors Network here in the UK, and we don't work with the police. Like, we don't discourage people from going to the police, and we emotionally support survivors who have gone to the police, and we've supported people like through that journey. But in general, we don't work with the police, and we don't like offer resources about how to work with the police, because the amount of people in our group who've come to us with like just horror stories of like what's happened to them when they've turned to the police, and then people are wondering, you know, oh, if sexual violence against bi women is so common, why is it not reported so much, and why is there, you know, not, because we can't report it.
Right. Someone DM'd me a couple weeks ago in the midst of like all of the protests, and it's like, yeah, I've been harassed and it's like by an ex-partner, and I was wondering like what you thought I should do in terms of the police. I was like, I don't think I'm the right person you should hit up about this, because my answer is don't.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then I sent a resource on like what to do instead of, and ways to support victims instead of police. But then I also feel like, you know, bad, because we're all trained that the police are supposed to help us. So I'm like, what if I'm supposed to, like, what if my super progressive ideas on this are like not ones that people are receiving well?
I think though, you can't, you know, as a singular person, you're like not responsible for that other person's you know, trauma around this. And again, that's something that like the BSN team has to constantly remind ourselves, that like we are doing the best we can in this situation, but this is not on us.
Yeah.
But that's, you know, that's the problem, is that it's put onto, Vaneet and I have talked about this so much, in that like, because there's such a lack of resources for the bi community, it just all this trauma and like hurt that we're all put through gets put back into the community, because we're just turning to each other when we're not trained, we're not equipped, we're not funded. How do we deal with this stuff?
Yeah, most deaf.
It's really interesting as well. I feel like I've discussed this before online, but it feels like a lot of the time when it comes to race politics, it's Black people tend to be very sexualized, whilst Asian people tend to be very, like, I don't know what the term for it is, but like completely unsexualized. Like, we're like infantilized. It's really interesting. And I definitely wouldn't say, I feel like I would prefer that, because I would rather no one fetishize me, do not talk to me. like, I just don't know where that comes from. I feel like Hollywood is probably partly responsible, because of the way that they tend to produce Indian men as sort of the like creepy, lurky weirdos. And we tend to be like very perverted, very unmasculine. But then that gets even worse when you are a bisexual man, because bisexual men are also completely unsexualized. It's like gay men are like, you're in the closet, come out the closet, and bisexual women normally say that we are just secretly gay and therefore they don't want to touch us. So
you said bisexual women say that as well?
I didn't mean bisexual women, I just meant women, but actually, apparently some people do say that bisexual women say it too, which is very interesting.
I mean, I believe you. It's just wild that people can have their own forms of marginalization and then still perpetuate that against other people. It's like, I don't get it.
I don't get it either.
I mean, the internalized biphobia is so
real.
So real.
So real.
And just the way it comes out as lashing out at each other. I think we've seen a lot of that recently online is just...
Yeah. I mean, did you see the whole Gabby Road thing?
Is she was on a podcast. She has a podcast.
She's like a YouTuber. I think she does have a podcast. She has a book as well. But she was on, so the creator of Love, Simon, like the person who wrote the book, came out as bi, and then was like, I shouldn't have to come out to create this work. Like, I'm working through my own identity, and everyone's like just assuming straightness as the default and therefore forcing me to assert my identity before I can create any art that is bi or queer or at all. And then Gabby Road went on this like extended tweet rant that was like, well, yeah, you should have to come out and like essentially saying you have to prove your identity. And then other people kind of seized that and then were like quote tweeting it, like, see, this is exactly what I mean. Like, you should have to prove it, and like very much feeding into like that queer enough narrative, right? Mm-hmm. And then after she saw how, at first she was like doubling down. When she saw how other people were using her words, she issued an apology. But that put a really bad taste in my mouth because I can inherently understand why that would not be okay. I don't need like other people to teach me or like hold my hand through that. So it's like wild that people can be fully bi and like fully get how we're discriminated against, but then be like, but I think everyone should have to come out and assert a certain amount of queerness to participate in this community.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think we've had discussions about this in the past as well, because like we were discussing the sort of line between, you know, when you have like LGBTQ plus actors, when you have LGBTQ plus roles, and then you have people who are perceived as cishet playing those roles, and then it becomes a really tricky situation, because then it's like, well, then do they have to come out? But then if they come out, will they get discriminated against? And it's a really hard line to play. And I think when it's a personal thing, like when you're writing, that shouldn't be a restrictive. Like you're writing about queerness, and that will show through your work, right? If you write about queer people and you're not queer, it's probably going to end up being crap anyway.
Right. I mean, I do think that, you know, people critiqued Love, Simon for it being like a book about queerness for straight people. I think that there are some aspects of it, I haven't read the book myself, but some aspects of the movie and the TV show that I will say are very much like created for a straight person watching to understand it. However, that mostly speaks to like participation in queer community, not so much your internal queerness. Like there are plenty of queer people who are still like not up on what queer community looks like and means, and would not be able to put that into text or on screen, but that doesn't mean they're not queer.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I feel like for me, the thing that was disappointing about Love, Simon is the fact that they focused on Simon rather than the person that he was in love with, who was like a Black Jewish gay man. And I'm like, that would have been about 10 times more interesting. Like
100%. And also, like, side note, I am deeply in love with what's his name? Keenan Lons.
Yes.
He's so fine. Every single character he plays, he's so good at it. I don't know if you saw, I forget the name of the movie. It just came out on Netflix, but it was like a dance movie. No? Okay.
Yes.
And he plays like the head dancer, kind of like head cheerleader, head dancer character. And he's so fabulous. Like, I just want to marry him. I want that to be out there on the record.
I'm curious about how that movie went, mainly because like the way they showed it in the advert very much seemed like the white woman was going to like dominate and become like, she was like the underdog who then did really well. It's like, no one wants to see that. I want him to win. Like,
well, he was really like, he was a very mean girl in the movie.
Nice. Good.
So no one was rooting for him. He was really like, he insisted on being called Juilliard for the entire movie because he wanted to go to Juilliard. And then he didn't get in, and he was like, don't ever say the name again. It was like, he was very, but I like that they are letting like that not that the mean girl trope is a great trope, but I'm welcoming the diversity of characters who are allowed to be mean, the people who are allowed to like punch down at others. But I'm not trying to celebrate punching down in general, but like we're so often seeing these like really thin white girls be the most popular girl in school. So this is the first high school movie where I'm seeing like the most popular character be a Black queer man. And I was like, oh, hell no, I need to watch this movie.
Yeah.
He was still mean, it's a movie, but you know.
I think that is a good like point as well, that in queer representation, it's like, sorry, my brain is still kind of fogged at the moment. There's so much like respectability politics about like, you have to be, we've gone from like all queer characters are evil villains to like all queer characters have to be like soft, gentle, like white femmes, like Portrait of a Lady on Fire and even Haunting of Bly Manor, which I just finished. That now we're like,
I can't see any more period pieces.
Yeah.
Like when I've quit period pieces, there were like 3 that came out this year. It's no more.
We can hold ourselves into like queer representation has to be like soft and up, like not even uplifting, but like soft and yearning, and you know, they can't be complex or mean people. They've always got to be like good people, which I want to see more like evil, bitchy, horrible, like bisexuals who don't give a fuck about anything on screen, you know?
Definitely.
I think,
especially for me as like, not that I'm a character because I'm a person, but when I first was like making internet content, I was nervous about like, I wanted to make sure everyone felt so uplifted in my page that I was like, okay, I can't post this type of music because like hip hop can be particularly like, I guess, fetishy in a lot of ways about bi women. I mean, I think in general about all music can be that because our society is that. But like, I'd be like, oh my God, I don't want to post like DaBaby lyrics because that can seem like this. And like, I wanted to be that soft trope of someone who's attracted to women, right? Because women are so used to being hypersexualized and fetishized, but then it's like, but I also am just like attracted to them. Like that in itself is not bad. And the idea that queerness makes you predatory, I feel like I was feeding into that and then trying to only post like soft girl content.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, at the end of the day, I do like women though. So like, I'm just gonna post.
Like there's a difference between men fetishizing relationships between women and women expressing like raw sexual desire and energy for each other. And it's about like intention and impact. And I think so often we worry that we're like perpetuating the male gaze by, you know, wanting to fuck other women and wanting to look at other women when actually we're just being our biased selves.
Right. Like I'm even nervous to be like, this person's hot. Like, but at the end of the day, people be hot, you know?
Yeah.
It's interesting how that twists onto yourself. Like the discrimination ends up being so inbuilt that you now can no longer express your own sexual desires because of how people will perceive you as perpetuating the patriarchy, which doesn't make any sense. Like,
I'm tired.
Right. Like a kind of mask of center woman. I'm constantly like, oh my God, I'm, you know, being seen as like just an aggressive man, butch person who's chasing after women when actually I'm so weak and small.
Yeah, I've met you. I don't know if you're the ideal body type for a predator. Like,
I'm tiny. Excuse me. God, we're gonna have to edit out so much of me just like coughing and having COVID in the background.
well, you have COVID.
I want us to call this like the AmBIssadors COVID edition.
Honestly, leave it in there. Just be like, by the way, I am COVID. Just like start the video.
My dedication to the channel.
I mean, I was gonna say, I feel like the problem for me with bisexuality is just how white it can be, and I feel like you know, even when we go into the bi community, even in the UK, I don't know how it is with you in the US, Gabby, but I feel like in the UK it can be so white dominated, and it's so hard to find by people of color. I don't know if you experience the same thing.
I mean, so I live in Brooklyn. Brooklyn's a particular neighborhood. I'm going to say I have a lot of privilege as a Black person living here. There's very much a lot of people of color. Like, obviously there's still very white dominated spaces. And like some of the friends that I met, I literally met by saying to someone I met on the internet, I was like, oh, I feel like I don't have enough like Black queer people in my life. And then they took me to hang out with some of their friends and I created a community that way. But it's that easy in Brooklyn versus there are people who are like, oh my God, I really want to meet more people of color. And then they're like, well, the nearest person is 7 miles away. You're like, okay, well. So I just, I want to preface it. People ask me all the time on my platform, like, what do I do about dating? Like, I want to find other people like me, or I want to find friend groups and community. And that's going to be so different based on where you're located. I can't keep giving New York advice. But in Brooklyn, we have particular bars and clubs back when we could meet safely, that like I knew that going there, that there's going to be people that look like me, and especially like queer people and bi people that look like me. And that took a long time to find, but it certainly was findable in New York.
Yeah, I feel like there is that level of privilege in London, but it feels like I often experience this idea of like, you have queer people of color groups and often they are very gay dominated, and then I have bi groups and they're very white dominated. It's like, where's the blend? Like, where's the middle ground of having both at the same time?
There's literally like a group, not like an organized group, but people in Brooklyn constantly refer to Black queer Brooklyn. Like they almost say it like it's like one sentence, one word, Black queer Brooklyn, Black queer Brooklyn. So once I found like a lot of people who I would say are aligned with that, with those people and those parties and those events and those, again, it's not an actual organization, it's just, but once I was like more in that culture, I realized that like, yeah, it was hard to find, but there are just so many people who like could look and would never even find something to the degree that I found. And even as someone who's non-monogamous, a huge polyam community. So I'm trying to have more gratitude in my life, but it was hard to find. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
I think that's an interesting thing as well, because I've heard from people online that like the polyam community has issues with racism as well. And I don't know whether you experienced that before you found this sort of polyam community of people of color.
I was already, I would say, around Black queer Brooklyn. Like I was going to like party, like Caribbean parties specifically. And especially for Caribbean culture, and a huge thing that was an issue for me is that like our culture is very homophobic, like very, 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 like even the music that I grew up on, like I'd be at like high school dances and they'd play Caribbean music. And the first lyric of like, is like, man to man, girl to girl, that's wrong. That's like the first lyric of one of the more popular songs in dance hall. So I'm like, I know that homophobia is like pretty baked into that culture. So first of all, there's the Caribbean Equality Project, and to find them, and they're at every Pride. And then we have a Labor Day parade that's for Caribbean people. And to find that group that's queer people, but Caribbean people, and be marching with them, that was already like introducing me. And to go to parties, like that was, so like obviously the type of person who listens to Caribbean music and is around the Caribbean Equality Project, like it's gonna be a probably Black, not necessarily, but probably, but at least a Caribbean person. So once I started dating non-monogamously, I was dating people that I met amongst those communities. So I like diverted it. But if someone's entry point to non-monogamy is just, I want to find non-monogamous community, and they're not like already in Black communities, I'm sure that it's really hard. Because I've heard that too, that there is a lot of racism. And I mean, racism impacts like my dating app life, or me going to like just a regular club or party in New York. But I'm lucky that I found my community first before embarking on my non-monog journey, luckily.
I think that's a really important point about like the difference of experience of finding yourself and then your community compared to like finding a community and then yourself. I think that makes like a huge impact. Like a lot of people I spoke to for the book had done like finding themselves and then trying to find their community, and it's a slog.
I mean, I'm 28 now. I'm oh my God, I'm turning 29, but I'm pretty old. So that took a lot of time. Like I'm almost disconnected from the 20-year-old who was still finding herself, like finding parts of herself, and then finding those white spaces, and then finding those spaces that had people of color in it, and then finding other aspects of myself, and then other aspects. Like once I found community, it was a lot easier to dig into like deeper bits of myself, but I still found myself first before even starting that. Like I used to be, I mean, I'm still in a sorority technically, like you don't just leave when you graduate, but I'm in a sorority. Like you're alumni forever. Yeah, I'm learning like sign language right now from my sorority sister. We're doing like sorority classes. So I'm still part of a sorority, even though I've graduated. But when I was in that sorority, I was looking for community, and then the absence of, I love my sorority, but the absence of the community that I needed, let's say, is what called me to like look for it more in other places. And like that sorority space, like having a community helped me find myself, but since it wasn't the right community, like I couldn't do any of like the deeper work.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting because like like you said, it is like a step-by-step process of trying to find that space. Because like for me, I grew up in Southwell, I was surrounded by other people who looked like me, but it was so patriarchal. Like it was so traditional gender roles, and very much like straight and heteronormative, and I couldn't exist in that space. And then, you know, as I came out as queer, I entered the queer community, and I was like, whoa, I cannot talk about being brown, can I? Like at all. Like cultural appropriation, like yeah, that doesn't exist. Like, but it does. Let's talk about it. And then you enter queer people of color communities, and then you realize that sometimes they work, sometimes they don't, because of, you know, there's still biphobia. And then you have bi communities, and that sometimes works, sometimes doesn't, for the same reasons. And so you just kind of make a meld of it all and then have fun with it.
I think the goal ultimately should be, it shouldn't be this hard to find yourself or community, because there are people who are just born knowing themselves, and those are straight white men, cis men. So the point is that it shouldn't be this hard. We're like, oh my God, it's this process, and first you have to find this community. And there are people who are just like born into themselves and born into community, and we should create a society where everyone gets to do that. Because this is so much work. Like this is 28, I'm like, oh my God, I can finally relax.
And there's so much trauma that you have to go through as well just to get there.
Mm-hmm. And then like what I'm constantly thinking, at least in my dating life, is I'm like, do I only want to date people now who look like me and share my identities? Or do I want to do the educational labor of dating someone who does not necessarily share those identities? Or do I want like an in-between, like where I'm going case by case? Like, I don't even know what my politics on that are, because it shifts all the time.
I'm like, obviously I'm like super privileged as like a white woman in the UK, but I'm like started dating again as like a queer person and like a spoonie, and I've been dating like able-bodied white men. I've been on a couple of dates with them, and I'm just like, okay, so what's your trauma? Because we're inevitably going to get into mine, but like I want to talk about yours first.
Correct.
And if you don't have any, that's not a red flag, but we're going to find it really hard to connect.
For me, it's like straight off the bat, I need to know your politics. Like, and I feel like I talk about politics so much that I feel like the conversation just comes up so naturally. Like I'm just like, oh yeah, I'm doing this volunteering thing. And you know, if they're going to be biphobic, we're going to find out. If they're going to be racist, we're going to find out. We're going to find out pretty quickly. And the second you get that, I'm out. I'm just like, I'm bye. I'm gone. Goodbye. And like that's what it is for me. I'm just like, you don't have to share my identities, but if you're going to be a person who's going to be like, oh, we shouldn't be protesting for Black Lives Matter, or like, oh, you know, trans people should, like any of that, like especially because like trans rights are so debated in this country at the moment. And I'm just like, if you are not showing solidarity with trans people, if you are not going to fill out that petition and fill out that GRAV form, like you're not doing enough, and I'm not happy about that.
Yeah, 100%. I had a lot of so many conversations with partners about this topic. And now, especially with cis men, they're like, so you don't want to date me anymore because you're just so gay now. And I'm like, no, it's because now that I am more aligned with queer community, your like casual homophobia, biphobia, transphobia is no longer like a fun party trick. It's like now I'm like more like engaged with and more informed about and more I guess I have more of the language to verbalize why those things are not okay. So I don't allow cis het men to like shame me out of my politics anymore. So now like when older, when exes come back and they're like, you don't want to date me because you're just so gay now. I'm like, I really don't want you to put this much weight on bisexuality. Like really is not that, it's that you suck. But they don't get it. It's fine. They can if it makes them feel better, like their little egos, it's because
I think we're running out of time a bit, and I think that's a really good place to kind of start rounding up. What did you want to say, Vaneet?
I was just going to say, I feel the same way about dating cis het women, because like I feel like I've been around. Yeah, I've had a lot of friends who are women, but a lot of the time, just because I'm not very masculine, they see me as the sort of like, oh, he's like the camp, he's the camp one, and they just see me as gay. And even if I came out as bi, I remember I had a friend and I was saying that I was bi, and her boyfriend was just like, oh yeah, it's fine with him. And I'm like, why? It's like, oh, because he thinks, and I'm like, yeah, but I'm bi, so I could still be like this predator that he thinks that all men are. So I don't understand. Not that I'm saying I'm a predator, I'm just like, the fact that you're using my bisexuality to justify the fact that your girlfriend can sleep over at mine, like, what? And I'm just like,
it's like a threat to their relationship rather than like a threat to her.
Right, and like I just didn't understand that, and I was just like, that doesn't make any sense, and let me tell you why. And she didn't see a problem with it either, because they just assume that bisexuality means gay, and I'm just like, I'm not gonna go through all of this. I'm not gonna have this conversation. I'm not gonna be like your gay best friend. It's not happening because I'm not gay. So
I think it's also like, and I think this is a huge thing with like trans people. It's like the misconception that like bi men and trans people and all these other identities are not going on dates. They're like, they act like no one wants to date certain like subsections of the queer community. And that's so inaccurate, just because like they, I guess, personally don't want to. They're like, oh, like you're not a threat because no one wants to date you. Like, who said that?
Yeah.
Exactly.
My boyfriend when I was a teenager was like, oh, it doesn't count with girls, and like all my internalized biphobia kind of was a good thing at the time, because I was like, oh, it doesn't count with girls. All right, I'm about to like
I was like, no problem.
I'm living my life. Gabby, do you want to tell us about any upcoming projects that you've got? Anything that you want to shout out?
Just my book, pre-order. I will have a cover soon, so I feel like I haven't been promoting it as much until I have like the final cover I can show everyone. Right now, they use like stock imagery on my book cover, which is fine. It's just like a white person's hand, and I don't have that hand. And I would love if, since it's my book, at least I could have just a hand that looks like my hand, since I've bought so many books that have hands that don't look like mine. But all that being said, I'm writing about the internet and how to navigate it. I have a great chapter on queerness as it pertains to the internet, but I also just talk about the internet from that lens overall. And also about, I think a huge theme of my book is reimagining the internet as a more democratic place than it currently is, and talking about like the splinternet and how like different countries can have different internet experiences completely because of like legislation. So if that seems like something you'd be into, pre-order my book. It's at Target and Amazon. How to live with the internet and not let it run your life.
I personally can't wait to read it because I need that advice.
Yeah, I think they wanted me to write a book just like about mental health. And then I gave them a book that was like a very intersectional social justice book about the internet, and a lot of like really great tech tidbits, but a lot of that. And they were like, okay, sure, whatever. We'll just keep going.